Good morning. Well, thank you all for coming this morning. And yeah, I look forward to this conversation. First of all, thanks also to the Center for Creative Arts at the University of KwaZulu-Natal for hosting the Time of the Writer and giving us an opportunity to share one of society's most important things. Without writers, without storytellers, how do we know who we are, and how do we keep our memories, right? So the theme for the festival is reflections, resonance, and revival. So we're going to speak to that through at Fire Hour. And the things that have been said about at Fire Hour by Gilder is love, art, freedom, and struggle. Bheki Makhathini's Unfinished Revolution, a testament to resilience and transformation against the backdrop of South Africa's turbulent history. So for me, preparing my notes, I'm calling this at Fire Hour Round 2. Because we had a conversation about it Fire Hour that first came out last year at, it was at IFAS in Pretoria, or Alliance Française. It was at Alliance Française. So yeah, I'm a bit of an Alliance person, so thank you to Alliance Française for hosting us as well. So round 2, I want to start off by, do you want to read or can I read? Should I do it? Okay. So it's from chapter 12. I'm just going to dive straight into it and I'll ask the question. What is this? Pumla taps at the 2 exquisitely neatly written pages. Her body swaying with the jostling of the train as it finally frees them from the clutter of the London outskirts and into the sunlight of an early spring. This is not a poem. Bheki turns from the window just as the first glimpses of green hedges and patchwork fields enter his vision. It's a short story, Dadewethu. Short story. It's a very short story. That tone, is she angry? It's a crossbreed between a short story and a prose poem. Or maybe it's notes towards a longer short story. I can make it longer. And, Ubanilo, is this supposed to be me? This Tembi? There is a louder tapping of her finger on the page. Yes and no. Bheki looks past her fingers resting on the paper to his words beneath. This is not the response he was expecting. It's fiction. She's fiction. You're just a hook. Just a hook. You have taken my life story, part of my life story, stolen it, distorted it, and you call me a hook? Fiction is theft of life. Art is theft. Pumla looks at Bheki, then past him to the window and the scene beyond. He too turns his gaze to the blessed pastoralness after the rectangles and spikes of London. Cows grazing, sheep moving in cloud-like bunches across, yes, that you can write Shem. Oh, sorry. He too turns his gaze to the blessed pastoralness after the rectangles and spikes of London. Cows grazing, sheep moving in cloud-like bunches across fields. Wet trees, ponds, and lakelets everywhere. What do you mean by hook? Hook, model, your story are the model for my little fiction. Like an artist, a painter's model. The representation in the painting is not the model, and the model is not the painting. They have become disconnected once the work is done. There is silence for a moment. You can't call her Timmy. Huh? Why not? I took that from Ahmed calling you Tembi by mistake. She looks at him, then past him again. That wasn't a mistake. That's my departmental code name. I borrowed it from my baby sister, Tembi. You can't use it. All my reports are signed with that name. If by any chance one day the Boers make the connection between the Tembi in your story, me and any of my reports that their deep throats in Lusaka have stolen, I will be in trouble. We will be in trouble, doubly so. She stands without a word, pauses upright for a moment, then walks down the train, ostensibly looking for the toilet, gives up and comes back, but takes a while to sit again. You have a baby sister? Now, there's another bit of your life story I didn't know. Her face softens a little, her eyes glisten. She's 9 years behind me. She should be in matric now. Round of applause for Barry Gilder. So can you tell everyone who's here who hasn't read the book? Show of hands who's read the book. Okay, cool. Oh, so y'all have got to buy it. Can you give us just a background to the scene, and you know how you came to construct these two characters of Bheki and Pumla, and this kind of discussion that they're having?
Is this on? I thought you were going to go a little bit further in that scene where she gives him hell for his description of her in the story, but thanks for saving me from that. I also want to express my thanks, of course, for this invitation to Time of the Writer, to the Center, to the University, to Alliance. Merci beaucoup. The background to that scene is that a little bit earlier in the book, Bheki and Pumla are in the room talking, and Bheki complains that she knows everything about his life because in the story, she is his quote-unquote handler. She recruits him into the ANC underground. And to do so, she has to take his biography. And he complains that I don't know anything about you. So she tells him the story of how she was an activist inside the country, how she got chased by the police and shot in her arm, and went into hiding, left the country. So he puts that into a book, into a short story, a short story. The book, up to this point, has mainly got Bheki's poems, and it's here that he's starting to transition to writing prose, so it's his first attempt at a prose work. And as you heard from the scene, when he shows her the short story, she's upset, one, about being his so-called model, but later on, which Karawa didn't read, she gets upset from a gender point of view, I guess, about how he describes the model in the story. And they have an argument about whether, to what extent, a piece of fiction can represent the sexist or racist attitudes of a character without offending. Is that what you can answer?
And it's particularly sensitive, and it's going to lead into my second question, because you know the descriptions of her hair, and we're having a conversation about that, and black girls and hair, guys, it's deep. You can discuss anything with us, but when it comes to her hair, you know, and even questions of sexism, and when you think about issues of struggle, and these are conversations that we've had, that especially women, black women during the struggle against apartheid, and the debates they have with their male counterparts about, while we're pursuing liberation of the black people, what about the liberation of women? Should they be a priority or not? So respectfully, I'm going to ask you, what gives you the right to write black in the context of struggle, particularly black women? Because when we think about authorship, it's also an issue of authority. So what do you reckon gives you the authority to write so intimately about black lives? I had to wait freak everybody out with a hard question.
It's not the first time I've got that question, and I'm not scared of the question. Art is the authority. I don't believe that black people or black women are not human beings and don't have the same feelings as people of other colors, races, and creeds. I perhaps have been fortunate in my own life trajectory, having gone into MK in Angola, where I was the only white person in the camp. And there were no mirrors in the camp, so I forgot that I was white. Because people, once they got used to me, stopped seeing me as that. So my black characters are characters that I create not from doing some sort of social anthropological research on black people. But
No, thank you for not being Wilbur Smith and how you portray black
When it comes to women characters, I'm the father of 3 daughters, grown daughters, who are of a mixed race, some of them, with whom I've had an excellent relationship. I don't know how to answer that question, but I say women are people. And what I try to do in the novel is give them her own role, although Bheki is perhaps the main character. The interaction between them, the discussion, sometimes the arguments like this one that we read, reflect what really happens between people, between men and women, and what happens in the struggle. Women involved in the struggle, whether at home or in exile, were constantly challenging, not just men, but men, about the gender issues, about patriarchy, about the role of women in the struggle.
No, Pumla is quite a badass. I really enjoyed that character. So, Bheki Makhathini is a young person who's suspected of betraying the ANC. And betrayal is a significant theme in At Fire Hour. It's a significant theme throughout literature, right? Because it's an act of deliberate disloyalty, which is really key to how we feel safe in the world and around each other. Because we are, as human beings, we rely on each other to do well in terms of surviving on this planet. So when somebody does that to you, it shatters your sense of safety in the world. How and why did this theme of betrayal preoccupy you to the extent of writing this novel? What is it about betrayal that hooked you to presenting it as a theme that would carry us through the story?
But you know the answer, Carol, because you know my biography. And for those who don't know, I was eventually deployed in the ANC in exile to the ANC's Intelligence and Security Department, in which we had to deal all the time with trying to identify agents that the apartheid regime sent to infiltrate the ANC. And there are 2 aspects to that. The constant attempt by the apartheid regime to infiltrate us. The one is genuinely trying to find out who is actually an agent. With limited means, we didn't have the kind of means that the apartheid security had, so we had to try from inside the country to get information about the person. We tried to look for contradictions in the person's biography or story. And it was very difficult. But the other side is that it caused innocent people to be suspected. And once you're suspected, it's very hard to get rid of that suspicion, even if you're clear. And that's what happens to Bheki. So the story, the main thrust of the novel for me was not about betrayal. It's a key theme. But it's rather about the conflict or the dynamic in Bheki between his art and his activism. Fighting and writing as his key conflict, if you like. But the theme of betrayal is very common for those people who are writing about those days, the struggle. Mark Langer is one example who had a real experience of his brother being killed by so-called comrades who alleged that he was an apartheid agent, and it turned out the ones who killed Mark's brother were the apartheid agents. And that thing happened, I won't say frequently, but it did happen, that apartheid agents falsely accused people and then bumped off. So it's a theme of the struggle, not just from exile. Some of the things happen inside the country. Yeah.
So speaking to that issue of kind of the conflict that Bheki faces between, his heart and his duty, I suppose, right? He's driven also by a sense of duty to be part of the struggle. Did you experience any kind of that conflict in the writing of this book? Like, what kind of internal conflict, if any, did you have while you were writing this book?
The only conflict I can remember is when the hell will I finish? Well, it's a hard question to answer in relation to Bheki's conflict because, I wasn't, in writing the book, I wasn't involved in the struggle. I was just a lowly ambassador representing a country in a very difficult part of the world. So the struggle was to find time to write. But in Bheki's case, it's not between his heart and his head. His heart was committed to the struggle. He wanted to fight. But half of his heart was committed to writing. And the way that he relates to the world and to events is constantly recording in his head, making notes and little notebooks to feed into his writing. And there's a point in the book, without giving it away, where his fighting becomes dominant and his writing begins to fade until he's forced by circumstance because he can't fight anymore to get back into his writing. But for me, I didn't experience any conflict in writing the book. I actually really enjoyed it. I have this experience, not just in this novel, even in the previous one, where I don't want to say fall in love, but my characters become real to me and they start pulling me by the hand. And when something bad happens to them, tears well up in my eyes. I know that's weird.
I think it's sweet. But I suppose was similar in that way that, and I think everybody here is that we do appreciate art that way, where what you can't see becomes real. So yeah, thank you for that. And then going back in time, right, because it is a work of historical fiction of sorts, because it's set in a time and a struggle that actually happened, and the themes that it speaks to are themes that we still grapple with to this day. But in terms of going back from 76 to 1990 and then writing this several decades later, did you have to employ any tools or rely on your memory to kind of reconstruct place and the textures and the colors of those years? I was only born in 81, so and time has a weird trick. In your lifetime, you tend to think things are more colorful than in the olden days. But when you had to go back in time, did you have to use any kind of devices, to help you remember, whether it's listening to music or looking through old notes or pictures. How were you able to reconstruct that period?
In different ways. Part of it, as you hinted, was my life. I moved through a similar geographical and time trajectory that Bheki and Pumla moved through. But this novel was written as part of a PhD in creative writing, which I got.
Congratulations, Dr. Bheki Gilder. What?
There's one of my teachers sitting there. The other part of the PhD, the main part is the creative work, but the other part is what I call a scholarly essay, which has to have a theme similar to the creative work. And that scholarly essay looks more academically at the issue of art and struggle in the context of the ANC, the exile writers. It looked particularly at three writers, Alex Laguma, Mongani Soroti, and Mandla Langa, but also at a series of culture against apartheid conferences that took place in exile, Amsterdam, Gaborone, Big Falls, in the 70s and 80s. So for that part of the PhD, I had to do quite a lot of research, so that helped for some aspects. I also did a lot of reading of books that Bheki read, like Tolstoy and Cholokov and others. And then I was helped in some cases by recording the memory of people I was with. I also had interviews for the scholarly part with Mandla and Mongani. So some of the memories came from there. But most of it was reconstructed memory. I stress reconstructed because I don't know how accurate my memories are, but in terms of the feeling of place and people, I'm happy with Betrayal. But as I say, I moved through the same spaces and times. Botswana, Gaborone, Lusaka, London, Moscow, Angola. Yeah.
Wow, thank you. And speaking of Dr. Sorota, he wrote the biography of Mirvis Mombati. It came out towards the end of last year, so if you can look for it, it is published by Sithala. It's a beautiful portrayal of a really remarkable woman who was part of the struggle against apartheid.
She was my grandmother, by the way.
Right, okay. Everybody still talks about her as if she's still around, like, yeah. she had an amazing role. But then another thing that you do that's interesting, I'm going to open to the floor, and then if there's extra questions that I have to ask, I'll ask, but I think you all might have some questions as well. So it's a work of historical fiction where Bheki Makhathini is a constructed character, as is Pumla, his handler and partner and lover. Yet you also have appearances by actual historical people, some of whom we actually know, but like Walisoro Desbe, the late Prof. Kosisile, the poet laureate, also makes an appearance. And then you kind of show up but pseudonymously. Can you break it down?
I show up how?
Is it pseudonymously?
Oh.
Did I pronounce that correctly? P-S-E-U-D, yeah, that's what.
Yeah, there's a character in the book who is me, a minor character. And those people who read my first book, my sort of semi-memoir book, Songs and Secrets, would recognize some of the scenes from that book, which are written from first-person point of view. I wanted to see what it was like creating me as a character objectively, how other people might have seen me. I think it worked. I don't know. Other people have said it worked. I don't know if it thought it worked, but I enjoyed that. I kind of could laugh at myself in some ways. And some of the scenes in which I appeared pseudonymously were real. There's a scene where the character sings at the festival Art Against Apartheid festival in Amsterdam in 1976, May 1976. In Songs and Secrets in the prelude, there's a scene, now my point of view, of that same thing. Other parts of the book, he appears, I'm saying he appears fictionally. There's a scene on the train where they're all coming back from Birmingham, was it Manchester? Birmingham. And he reads one of his poems and they all start sort of making music on the train. That's fiction. I wish it wasn't. But the people in the scene were real people. So yes, there are real people that appear in the scene fiction. On a few occasions, for example, was it Gilder speech at the opening of the Gaborone 1982 festival was real. That's taken from my records of that conference. Lewis and Corsi's thing about exile and writing at that 1976 conference in the car was taken from his actual paper that he delivered. So there's a few things like that are real.
Were there any kind of legal considerations that you had to make when you did that?
Are there any lawyers in the room? I didn't tell. My publishers, I forgot to say my editor is sitting right there, Joanne, edited my book. Thank you, Joanne, public now. So, she didn't have any legal problems to do. My publishers did, because anybody in a bad light, as far as I can tell. And I say, in the acknowledgement section that they are treated, these are fictional, these are not real issues of exceptions that I mentioned. So there were no legal issues. There were some permissions I had to get in terms of quotes. I don't know whether I should say this in public, but one of the things I quoted in the last but final version was 4, 5, 6 lines from a song that Abdullah Ibrahim sang at the 1982 Gaborone Festival. And I applied, I think it was through Sony, for permission. They wanted to charge me 10,000 rand, which I was willing to do because I love that song. And then I asked Abdullah and he refused permission. I don't know why. I asked. So I'm calling for a boycott of Abdullah Ibrahim. So I managed to kind of paraphrase the song without quoting it. But no, we will.
The reason why I had to ask that, and I mean, I don't know whether it's a thing, but I had a memory of when I was a baby working at Jacana, and there was an author that had to actually remove, they wanted to get, it was a mission to get permissions to quote a Tracy Chapman song. So it appears that there might be a thing with music and getting permissions in literature. I don't know, I'm not a publisher, but it's just, it's just something that I thought about. Because also we're also sitting with the big deals. We're sitting with a copyright amendment bill that might be signed into law, which is going to make life hell for writers, in the sense that potentially you'll be able to reproduce their books and they won't get paid for it in the name of access to information. So there's a lot of things that we're grappling with, and I don't know much about the law. So I was just interested for you as somebody who's gone through the process of getting publishing and dealing with people who are alive, people who actually existed in a work of fiction, and how did that play out? So thank you for sharing that with us. Mara, you know what, Uncle Abdullah, though, you know what, let's just give him the praise because he's also temperamental. So we'll appreciate the music, but he's kind of, he's a temperamental person, but I'm sorry that you couldn't get the permissions to
the painful thing
to show him love in your work.
The painful thing about it is that concert in Cameroon in 1982, in which he sang that song, I followed him on stage. Now, following Abdullah Ibrahim, I followed him on stage to sing my songs. Following him on stage was very difficult, and I thought he would have sympathy with me when I commanded him.
Do you still perform music?
I'm looking at my wife because she's been trying to pressure me to pick up the guitar, and I haven't for a while. I'm not sure why, but I think while I was in Damascus, there was not that opportunity. I didn't make use of the opportunities because I was.
You were doing a PhD.
Hey?
You were doing a PhD.
Sure, I
You
did.
were dying.
Yeah, thank you. You hear that? I was doing a PhD at BBC.
Wonderful. It's time for questions from the floor. Do I give a roving mic to someone? Okay.
My teacher and my editor fighting for
No, I can't really make a claim to have helped you in any large way because the manuscript came to me so beautifully written and so clean. I had peer reviewed it though and absolutely raved about it and said this must be published because of the historical value. I mean, it is absolutely incredible just with the information and the content about the struggle and how art played into the struggle. But for me, I just wanted to say it is really a beautiful love story, and I think that is what I felt about it, is that once I started reading, I couldn't put it down, because this relationship between Bheki and Pumla develops, and they have such a stunning relationship through their struggle, from the time they meet as young people to the time, through their marriage, to the time they are older people towards the end of the book. And I'm not giving anything away, but it is the story of their lives, and for me that was the strength of it, is that it is a beautiful piece of fiction. It has that interweaving of Bheki, the literary person, learning about writing. He goes to, which university does he go to study writing?
To Norwich.
Yeah, so as a writer myself, for me, I just found that fascinating, that interweaving of his inner life as a writer, as well as his love story with Pumla, but then also the love story he has with South Africa, the love story he has with his country, that he wants things to change, and then how things also subtly go wrong. So yeah, I just want to say it's a beautiful, beautiful book, and please buy it. And it must win some awards, many awards, all of the awards. If I was a judge, I would hail it as one of my best reads. And it's written with an incredibly light touch. So when one thinks of politics, one thinks, oh, I'm going to be mired down. But it's not that way at all. It's just a page turner. It really is a bit of a thriller. So, yeah, buy the book.
Thanks, Joanne.
Oh, sorry, I did have a question. Sorry, here I am. I've just been rattling off. There's one scene in the book. It's a short story that Bheki writes, and it's called At Fire Hour. And to me, that's a seminal scene. When I read that, I just felt, wow, this is powerhouse writing, and also your imagination was at play then, because it's a battle scene. And I just thought maybe you could, speak a little bit more about At Fire Hour.
Two things. One, thanks for the confession that you peer-reviewed my manuscript. I didn't know that. I'll have to pull the book back from the shops and add a thank you to you. It's not called At Fire Hour, it's called Fire Hour.
Fire Hour,
Yeah.
the story.
Sure, how do I talk about that? When we were in exile and being trained in the Soviet Union or the then German Democratic Republic of Cuba or Algeria or whatever, but particularly in my experience, I had training in Moscow, 1980-81. We had not training in Moscow, even in the camps in Angola. There was a song we used to sing. I'm not going to sing it now because I'm not sure about the tune, but had the refrain, "Take our country the Castro way." You know, we saw these photographs of Fidel Castro sitting on top of a tank, driving into Havana, the final victory over Batista in Cuba. And the way that the Soviets and others taught us the theory and the practice of liberation struggle, we imagined that we would drive into Pretoria on top of Soviet tanks with pretty women throwing flowers at them. So the story that Bheki writes is to exactly imagine that kind of scene of, you know, the struggle has progressed, that the ANC or MK now has conventional capabilities, tank brigades and an air force, is taking over the country the Castro way. So that's Bheki's way of getting that vision, that imagining, that wish into his literature.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here representing the Department of Creative Writing and really just celebrating your hard work, because right from the beginning, Barry, you are a determined person and you have so much love and commitment, you know. And I am delighted to be here. And I'm also very curious about something. So you're writing from your own experience, things that you're making up. I would like to know, was there anything that surprised you? Because you're writing what you know, right? But in writing it, was there stuff that surprised you as it came out? And if you could just give us an example if that did happen. And yeah, so how was that?
One way to answer would be to say everything surprised me. The act of writing, at least for me, apart from some broad strokes that I pre-planned, sometimes which don't happen, everything just, it's like, you know, I don't want to be all mystical about muses and something coming down to me from above, but as I'm writing, things happen that I didn't plan to happen. There are some things I planned, but so lots surprised me. Things that happen. I mean, even the relationship between Bheki and Putin, I didn't plan that. They first met at the May '76 Contra-Apartheid Conference in Amsterdam, which I attended. I didn't think ahead that this is going to be a relationship through the book. They just said to me, look, Barry, we really like each other, can you hold on to us? I'm being partly facetious, but it's the act of writing that's full of surprises, I think, because, you know, it's not kind of, I don't like writing the scholarly essay, which you have to plan and your supervisor tells you to change this, change that. It just comes and yeah, full of surprises.
Thanks for the lovely session. You mentioned that your critical essay was thinking through other texts that simply writing similar issues. You've been speaking about Dade Mandela, and while you guys were talking about the book, I was thinking about the texture of shadows and the lost language of the soul, which I was such brilliant text. How would you say, to what extent would you say that your novel is in dialogue with texts like Texture or Lost Language or Prawali's Rumors, I think, yeah.
In some ways, my trajectory in that period, just space and time, was similar to Prawali's and Mandela's. I served in the underground leadership of the ANC in Botswana with Wally in the mid-80s, for example. And Mandela and I go back a long way, and it's been almost lifelong friends, I suppose. So for the scholarly essay, I looked at works, including ones you mentioned, by Lacuna, by Mandela, and by Mongani. And both appear fictionally in the novel. In fact, all three appear fictionally in the novel. Lacuna in the early scene, and Wally and Mandela later on. So, yeah, I'm not sure how to answer your question. I think that my interest academically was in how the activism of those three writers impacted on their creative work, particularly their novels. I know that Wally wrote a lot of poetry too, but I didn't look at poetry for the purpose of the essay. Bheki writes poetry, but yeah, I'm not sure how I answered your question, but
Thank you, Corrado. Thank you, Larry. I agree with Joanne. The book is fascinating. You pick up the pages, you turn to the pages, and you don't want to put it down until you get to the end. And whilst the love story is pivotal and it keeps you going, what I found particularly interesting with the book, and which kept me wanting to turn every single page, is just how wonderful it was as an archive of all the big moments in our cultural struggle in our country, the references, and whether some of those were populated with imagination or not, but the references to them, I think, for me, was just absolutely good. And for anyone who worked as a cultural activist in the 80s and even earlier 70s, you will find you have the same experience. You just read and you place yourself in there, and I think it's particularly important for anyone who wants to even have a sense of what our cultural history was all about, and the immense passion that existed in the movement for the way culture would play such a vital role in the liberation struggle and giving us the hope of transformation. We may not have realized that now, we may have failed that particularly, but it existed at that particular time and was completely evident in every chapter of that book.
Thanks, Ishmael. I don't know if you mind a little anecdote I want to tease you with. Ishmael was my discussant when I launched the book at Ike's in September. In the book, there's a number of Bheki's poems and short stories, as you picked up. And Ishmael confessed publicly at the launch that he Googled Bheki Makhathini to find out if he was a real writer. That's a great compliment, by the way.
I got to say so when I did.
That's remarkable. And I mean, something that I'm interested in as just as an amateur is, you know, this idea of intertextuality. So do kind of an intertextual reading into someone's work. And I think, you know, if anyone is interested, you know, any students of literature, I think it would be such a good suggestion for somebody just to sit and study Barry's body of work. It's small, but it's big, you know. And read your work and see how it speaks to each other, and listen to the songs that I mentioned, and read the other books that I mentioned in that work. It's like it's a whole schooling in and of itself. So thank you for not only dedicating your life to fighting for justice for South Africans, but thank you for even, you know, carrying on post when most people should just be chilling and shifting to. And should continue to produce cultural work, but particularly to write for us. It's something that we really appreciate. And also happy Human Rights Day, happy Sharp Full Day. It's not happy, but you know what I mean, right? Because this is one of the things that a lot of us are still really trying to fight for. You know, the access to the written word, the access to stories, as part of an access to educating ourselves about what it means to be human. Thank you, Time of the Writer. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Tata Barry Gilder, for being with me once again, round 2 of that final hour. And you've been a gracious and generous audience. Round of applause for Tata Barry Gilder.
Very good.
Ole Boharo, Tata.